Well, while we give the dancers a rest, what do you say? Will I tell them a story? Will I tell them a story, love? Sit down there and I'll tell them. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, a turkey smoked a baccy, and a very good baccy it was. A mouse carried a house, and a very good house it was. And a pig ran through the stubble with a knife and a fork stuck in his bottom, crying, "Who'll eat me? Who'll eat me?" And it was about that time that they used to have in Ireland the hiring fairs. And the boys and the girls from the small farms, you see, with the big families, would go to the town of the hiring fair. And in there would come the wealthy farmers from the big farms and the small families. And they'd come and they'd hire the boys and the girls. That's the way it was. At this particular hiring fair, anyway, everybody had been hired except one poor, misfortunate little girl, like you were saying. And there she was in the twilight of the evening. And she's standing with the tears streaming down her face because all her friends, all the boys and all the girls were gone. And whatever look she gave to the right-hand side, maybe it was the tears in her eyes, maybe it was the twilight or what, but didn't she see the most peculiar-looking little man that you ever saw in your life standing next to her? He had outlandish old-fashioned clothes on, you know, and turned up little points on his shoes. And he says to her, "Did nobody hire you, little girl?" "No, sir," she said, "nobody." "Well," he said, "my name," he says, "is Don Nipper-Recepto. Would you come along with me?" She said, "Dad, I never heard a name like that before, sir, but since nobody else hired me, I'll go along with you." And what did they do? But they climbed up a high hill and they traveled down into a low valley and they went along a straight road that was all full of twists and turns until they came to a little thatched cottage. He says to her, "That's where I live, little girl. What would you call that?" "I'd call it a hut or a house or whatever you please, sir." "Oh, no, no, no," he said. "No, that, little girl," he said, "is the great castle of Strawbungle." Will you remember that now, little girl? The great castle of Strawbungle. Well, because she wanted to stay in that job, you see. And they got in, and the fire was gone almost in the hearth. And she started putting a couple of sods of turf on the fire like that, you see. And as it began to blaze up, he said to her, "What do you call that, little girl?" "I'd call..." "No, no, no, little girl," he said. "That is hot cockalorum. Now remember that. And it's time now that we had the tea." Well, she's pouring the water into the kettle, you know, with the pannikin like they used to in the old days. And he said, "What do you call that, little girl?" "I call that the wet or the water or whatever you please." "That," he says, "is pondelorum." She'd never heard a word like that before, but sure, if that's what he was going to call it, that's what he was going to call it. Who should come in but the cat? And the cat sat down beside the fire and he started purring. "What do you call that, little girl?" "I'd call that the cat or the kit or whatever you please, sir." "Indeed, little girl, your education is sadly lacking," he said. "That is white-faced simony. Now remember that, little girl." Well, the kettle was boiling and the cat was purring away, and Don Nipper-Recepto, he began to take off the boots, you know, and he says, "What do you call these, little girl?" She says, "Those are your brogues or your boots or whatever you please, sir." "Indeed they are not, little girl," he said. "Those are my hay-down treaders." "And do you see these?" he says. "What do you call those?" "Those are your breeks or your breeches or whatever you please, sir." "Those, little girl," he says, "are my fortune's crackers." Now remember that, little girl. "I'll show you now, little girl," he says, "where you're going to sleep. Up the steps." They didn't have stairs in those days, you know, it was ladders up to a loft. "What do you call that, little girl?" he says. "You call that the steps or the stairs or whatever you please, sir." "That, little girl," he says, "is the wooden hill." And he shows her the bunk. 'Twas straw, of course, in those days, you know, with a bit of cover thrown over it. And he said, "What do you call that, little girl?" "That's the bed or the bunk or whatever you please, sir." "Little girl," he said, "have you had no education at all?" "That is the barnacle. The barnacle, remember that now." Well, off, of course, he goes to his own quarters, and after the day's traveling and everything, sound asleep, sound asleep. But doesn't he wake up in the middle of the night with a banging on the door like that. And he jumped up and he said, "What is it? Is that you, little girl?" And here's the answer he gets. "Rise up from your barnacle, don nipper recepto. Put on your fortunes, crackers, and your hay down threaders quick and come down the wooden hill, because Whiteface Simony has a spark of hot cockalorum on his tail, and unless we pour Pondalorum on it quick, the whole castle of Straw Bungle is going to be up in hot cockalorum."